Congratulations. You just woken up in the year 1810. There's ice on your eyelashes and your breath curls like fog in the air. You're not in Siberia. You're in a French hospital, and you're about to lose your sight. You open your eyes, but you wish you hadn't. Not because of the pain, though there's plenty of that, but because of the light. Pale, cold, indifferent. It bleeds through the stone windows like winter itself had taken up residence in the room. And maybe it has. Because this isn't your bed. These aren't your sheets. And this isn't your century. You're in the Hotel Dieu de Paris. And it's freezing. Not metaphorically. Not some charming chill that calls for a wool blanket and a cup of tea. No, this is the kind of cold that seeps into your teeth. That latches onto your fingernails and nests there. That crawls into your bones like it's home. And in 1810, in this place, cold isn't an accident. It's the treatment. They packed your skull with rags soaked in river ice. Not clean ice. Not alpine crystal. Just whatever they hacked out of a nearby pond at dawn. Still muddy with God knows what. They say it calms the fever. Keeps the brain from boiling over. Balances the humors. You weren't aware your humors needed balancing. But they seem quite sure. You reach up to touch your head and feel nothing but damp cloth and bruised skin. Someone tied the compress down with a strip of linen. Tight. Too tight. Your pulse throbs beneath it like a second heart. The room smells like vinegar and old linen. Like sweat from 10,000 ghosts. Beds line the walls, if you can call them beds. Wooden planks, some with straw, others with bare mattresses that remember more suffering than softness. Most of the other patients lie still, their eyes half closed. Some whisper to themselves. Some stare into nothing. A nun walks past and glances down at you. She murmurs something that sounds like a prayer or a warning. You're not sure which. Her hands are pink from a cold. Her breath, too, is fogged. You're hungry, but hunger is nothing new. What's new is the way your eyes burn, the way the world blurs at the edges, like a watercolor left out in the rain. The doctor comes in, black coat, white cravat. He carries a notebook and doesn't look at you. He stops at the foot of your bed, jots something down, and says without blinking, "Keep the ice. Replace every hour. If the fever persists, apply snow to the eyes." You think he's joking. He isn't. You try to speak, but your lips are dry and cracked, like ancient parchment. The words don't come. Just air. And maybe that's enough. Because what would you even say? Please don't ice my retinas. I like to keep my vision. Thank you. The doctrine here is clear. The body is too hot. The mind too wild. The soul too reckless. And ice, lovely, silent, unforgiving ice can fix that. A cart rolls by, wheels squeaking. It's carrying a bucket of new ice, chunks sharp enough to slice. The nurse scoops a handful and crushes it into powder, then wraps it in fabric. She presses it to a child's face in the next bed. He flinches, then stills. You wonder if you looked like that yesterday. It's strange. You never thought you'd die of cold in France. But that's the thing about history. It's rarely romantic. Mostly it's wet, and raw, and slightly unsanitary. You close your eyes again. Not because you're tired, though you are, but because your eyes are failing. The blur has grown. Light dances strangely now, like it's mocking you. You can't tell if it's the fever or the cure. Outside, a bell tolls. It echoes through the corridors like a lullaby for the condemned. And you, lucky you, you've just begun your stay in the cold room, where frost is medicine and blindness is a minor side effect. You drift. You do not sleep, but the silence wraps itself around you like snow. Soft, final, absolute, and maybe, just maybe, this is how the light begins to leave you. Your symptoms are familiar. Fever, seizures, a touch of madness. The treatment? Ice to the temples. Directly, repeatedly, until the world goes white. You were never that sick. Not at first. It started with a tremble in your fingers, a dry throat. Then came the fever, the little sun trapped beneath your skin, no big deal. You figured you'd sweat it out. You didn't. You don't remember when you collapsed, or how many hours passed between your bedroom floor and this stone box. But now you're here, in a room that smells like rust and cold cabbage, surrounded by silence, so thick it feels like another blanket. One you can't shake off. The doctor called it inflammatory disorder of the cerebral region, which is the long, polite way of saying your brain might be trying to escape your skull. He said it like he'd seen it 1,000 times. Maybe he had. That's the thing with doctors back then. They didn't look at you. They looked through you like a riddle they didn't care to solve, only treat. And treatment, well, that was the fun part. Because if you were burning up inside, boiling with unseen poisons, bursting with devilish heat, then logic said you had to be cooled. Forcefully, repeatedly, until something broke. And that's where the ice comes in. It doesn't melt. Not here. Not on your skin. It just sits there, an accusation, a punishment, a promise. They press it to your temples. They strap it to the back of your neck. They rest it on your chest like a holy relic. And they watch, not for signs of recovery, but for signs of stillness. You're shivering so hard your teeth knock like tiny bones in a drum. But they don't warm you. They wrap you tighter in linen, in logic, in 19th century certainty. One nurse whispers, if the eyes twitch, it means the madness is rising. So they ice your eyes too, right on the lids, or underneath if they're feeling ambitious. One of them whispers, almost lovingly, that the nerves behind your eyes are too excited, that the cold will teach them to behave. That's a beautiful idea, isn't it? That nerves are just unruly children, and ice is the strict governess. So you lie there, letting them discipline your nerves, and the world gets quieter. Not peaceful, just distant, fuzzy at the edges, like a painting soaked in rainwater. The fever remains, but now your body is confused, hot in the chest, cold in the skull, like a candle dipped in snow. Somewhere deep inside, a voice starts to mumble, maybe yours, maybe not. A prayer or a question. Is this really the cure? Because here's the thing they don't tell you in those waxy textbooks. The treatment never felt like healing. It felt like drowning without water. Like your brain was being exorcised from the inside out. They didn't have anesthesia. They barely had soap. But they had confidence. Oh yes, enough to call this torment science. Enough to do it to you again tomorrow. And again after that. There are rumors in the ward of patients whose eyes froze open, of others who simply stopped moving after too many sessions. They're spoken of gently, reverently, like sacrifices. No one questions the method, only the patient's constitution. You start to wonder, what if the fever would have passed on its own? What if all you needed was water and a dark room? But that's not how this era thinks. You don't rest a burning mind. You conquer it, subdue it, freeze it until it submits. Because in 1810, the enemy wasn't the illness. It was your body itself. And the only thing more terrifying than disease was desire, warmth, emotion, the messy, molten part of being alive. So they press ice to your skin, not to save you, but to sculpt you into something quieter, paler, more obedient. You blink, barely, and a sliver of light cuts through your field of vision like a knife. It stings. Your eyes ache in places you didn't know could ache. You try to speak again. Still nothing. A shadow passes your bed. The doctor's voice murmurs, "We'll try the snowpack next." The convulsions have lessened. You didn't know you were convulsing. You didn't know there was a next. But of course there is. There's always a next. Because here, in this place of cold cures and blind prayers, the line between sickness and salvation isn't drawn in logic. It's drawn in frost. And tonight, as you slip into a fever-dreamless sleep, wrapped in layers of ice and linen, you begin to wonder, what if the cure doesn't want you healed? What if it just wants you quiet? Weirdly enough, this all starts with Napoleon. Not the war, the obsession with balance. His doctors believed that too much heat caused moral decay, so they brought the cold. You think it would begin on the battlefield, with blood, with cannon fire, with something loud. But no, this war begins in a library, or perhaps in the smoky salon of a Parisian physician who speaks of humors with a glass of port in hand. It begins in the mind of a man who believed history should be logical, measurable, hygienic. A man who hated sweat and chaos and fever. It begins with Napoleon. Yes, that Napoleon. The one you've seen on postcards and biscuit tins. The one in the funny hat. The military genius. The empire builder. The man who crowned himself emperor because God was too slow. That man also had opinions on temperature. You may not know this, but the medical system under Napoleon was not just a collection of treatments. It was an ideology, a philosophy of the body, a belief that the human machine, like his empire, must be ordered, regulated, disciplined. And in that order, heat was the enemy. Heat was passion, rebellion, lust, illness, madness, uncleanliness. It boiled up from the belly. It flushed the cheeks of women and revolutionaries alike. It was unpredictable. It was feminine. Napoleon didn't like unpredictable, and so the cold became sacred, not just as therapy, but as morality. The French medical schools, empowered by the imperial budget and the emperor's love of science, adopted new methods to control the body. Theories changed rapidly. Sickness wasn't just imbalance now. It was excess. Excess blood, excess stimulation, excess desire. And heat. Heat fueled it all. And so began a quiet, clinical war. Not against enemies or traitors, but against the very concept of warmth. The operating rooms were kept frigid, not by accident, but by design. Windows opened even in winter. Patients bled on stone tables in their nightclothes. New cooling therapies were invented weekly. Snow compresses, iced wine enemas, cold baths that left the lips purple and the heart slow. To sweat was to sin. Even Napoleon's soldiers were affected. If a soldier in the field grew feverish, doctors didn't necessarily treat the fever. They corrected it, with shaved heads, with icy cloths on the chest, with discipline. After all, if a man could endure the cold, he could endure the enemy. Hospitals became laboratories of temperature control. They studied the effects of ice on the spine, the lungs, the nerves. One Parisian doctor swore he cured epilepsy by wrapping the patient in damp sheets and leaving him on a marble floor overnight. And nobody blinked. The idea of balance, so beloved by Galenic medicine, had mutated into something more brutal. The goal was no longer harmony. The goal was stillness, coolness, an emotional flatline. No one embodied this better than the physicians who advised Napoleon himself. Men like Corvisart and Broussais, who believed that inflammation was the root of all illness. And what is inflammation if not heat? So they cooled. They cooled everything. They cooled the blood. They cooled the bowels. They cooled the womb. Women were told to avoid excitement, sunlight, dancing, laughter. Ice was placed on their abdomens to soothe hysteria, on their breasts to discourage temptation. You see, in this war, the battlefield wasn't Europe. It was you, your pulse, your sweat, your flushed cheeks, your body's wild attempt to feel. That's what they were fighting. You can almost picture it. Napoleon pacing in his chamber, speaking to his doctors as if they were generals. The body, to him, was a nation. And illness? Illness was insubordination. Fever was uprising. And the cure was cold, clinical force. The ice wasn't meant to heal you. It was meant to restore order. A little blindness was acceptable. Numb fingers, quiet mouths. If it meant fewer outbursts, fewer deaths, fewer messy, sweating bodies rebelling against the empire of logic. And so now, in this hospital bed, with your breath fogging in the early light, you inherit that legacy. You're not sick. You're too warm, too fevered, too full of mystery. They will empty you of that, ice by ice, breath by breath, until you're balanced. Still, pure, just the way Napoleon liked it. Your body is not a home. It's an unstable climate. In 1810, doctors treat it like a battlefield. Fluids, humors, energies. Your fever is an enemy. Ice is their bayonet. You've always thought of your body as a home. A messy one, perhaps. Dust in the corners. A leak somewhere in the roof. But a home nonetheless. A place where your thoughts live. Where your memories nap in warm corners. Where your skin tells you when you're safe. Or not. But not here. Not now. Here in the year 1810, your body is not a sanctuary. It's a war zone. The moment your fever spiked, the doctors arrived. Not as caretakers, but as generals. They didn't ask you how you felt. They didn't need to. You were no longer a person. You were a terrain. A map. A problem to conquer. And the enemy? Heat. They call it excessive internal excitation. You call it the worst flu of your life. But they see things differently. In your flushed cheeks, they see rebellion. In your accelerated heartbeat, they hear the drums of a mutiny. Your body has declared war on itself, and they are here to put it down. And the weapons they bring are not kind. Bleeding, blistering, vomit-inducing potions with names like Aqua Fortis and Spirit of Niter. Leech therapy, ice to the skull, cold compresses to the groin, snow packs between your ribs. Not because these things help, but because they force your body to obey. They believe your blood is moving too fast, that your humors, those mysterious fluids that still hold onto medical charts like ghosts of Hippocrates, have turned against you, that your bile is plotting revolution in your gut. So they bleed you, sometimes from the arms, sometimes from the neck, other times from the ankles, in case your feet are conspiring. The logic is beautiful in its brutality. If the body misbehaves, you remove what it has too much of. Blood, heat, hope. A nurse hands you a tiny wooden stick and tells you to bite down. You wonder if this is for pain or just to keep you quiet. She ties your wrists gently to the bed frame. You're not dangerous, but you might thrash, and that would ruin the data. The physician arrives. He's smiling. He dips a cloth in a metal basin filled with slush and presses it firmly against your spine. The shock is indescribable. Not cold, not pain, something deeper, like your nerve just got kicked down a flight of stairs. Good response, he says, writing something in a notebook with ink-stained fingers. You want to scream, but your teeth are chattering too hard. He moves to your temples next. More ice. Your thoughts slow, not in a peaceful, meditative way. More like they're being strangled. You try to remember what you were thinking about before he walked in. You can't. He's winning. Because that's what this is, isn't it? A conquest. Your body has been labeled unsafe. Your fever is the insurgent. And the doctor, in his black wool coat and polished boots, is the colonizer. He will reclaim this land, your chest, your limbs, your breath for order, even if he has to raise the village to save it. And somewhere in the delirium, you wonder, what if the body isn't at war with itself? What if it's just begging for help? But there's no space for that here. Here, the logic is simple. Cold means control. Ice is discipline. And if your vision fades, or your speech slurs, or your hands go numb, that's just collateral damage. A small price for internal peace. So you lie there, draped in wet linen and moral certainty, the battlefield gone quiet for now. Not because you've healed, but because you've surrendered. Your fever has dipped, not broken, but ducked its head, and the doctors nod to one another with pride. They believe they've won. They always believe they've won, even when the patient never gets up again. Because this war isn't measured in lives. It's measured in silence. And tonight, you've given them what they wanted most. Stillness. Did you know your eyes were considered a danger zone? Not windows to the soul. More like vents for internal poison. Let's just say the ice went there too. You still haven't brushed your teeth. But we'll get to that next. Right now, you can't feel your face. Not from sleep. Not from stillness. From frost. They've placed another compress, soaked in half-melted river ice, directly across your brow, and it drips. Constantly. The water slides down the slope of your nose like tears you never asked for. One drop has found its way into your left ear. Another one into your collarbone. It's been 2 hours. Maybe more. Time doesn't pass here, it just pools. Your eyes hurt. Not in the way they usually do. Not the scratch of dust or the sting of light. This is deeper. It feels like something has been threaded behind your eyelids and pulled tight. Like your retinas are being slowly reeled in by an invisible hook. And you know what the worst part is? They think it's helping. See, in the year 1810, eyes aren't beautiful. They're not the windows to your soul, nor the reflection of inner light. They're suspicious, dangerous, too wet, too wild, too emotional. The physicians, bless their cold little hearts, believe your eyes are where the excess heat escapes the brain. If the soul were boiling, it would bubble out through the corneas. If the mind were mad, it would shimmer out through the pupils. So they ice them, to stop the leaking, to preserve the mind. They believe this, deeply, with the same intensity you believe in gravity. They see your eyes, glassy, red, twitching, as evidence of madness, not pain. And what you do with madness? You quiet it, you blind it, you cool it. A young assistant approaches with a small bowl. Inside, a grayish slush the consistency of wet chalk. He holds a tiny metal spatula. Yes, a spatula. And carefully spreads the mixture over your eyelids like he's buttering toast. It smells faintly of vinegar and something sweet. Camphor, perhaps. You flinch. Not because it hurts. Because it doesn't. That's what's terrifying. The cold is so deep, now you're not sure if your eyes are open. You can't tell. You blink, or you think you do, but everything stays dark. You ask a question, something soft, like am I still seeing? But your voice doesn't reach anyone. They begin the ocular press. It's exactly what it sounds like. 2 cloth-wrapped stones, cooled in snow overnight, are placed gently, symmetrically on your closed eyes. The pressure is firm, intentional, a little too heavy to be comforting, a little too light to scream. It's supposed to dispel inflammation of the optic nerve. It's also supposed to make you compliant. You lie still, because you have no choice. The world outside your head has disappeared. No color, no light, just the hum of footsteps and the distant rattle of carts and coughing. You start to hear your own body, the blood in your ears, the creak of your ribs, the echo of breath. A thought arrives quietly. What if they blind you trying to heal you? What they already have, but no one seems concerned. There's a comfort here in treating the eye, a satisfaction. After all, it's visible. It reacts. It waters. It bleeds. And if the patient loses vision, well, the fever was too strong. It's never the treatment. Never. They used to do this with onions, before ice. In medieval times, they'd rub crushed onion into the eye to draw out the corrupted vapors. If you went blind, it was God's will. Now it's science. Progress. The nurse returns to remove the compress. It clings to your skin like old bark. When she peels it away, your eyelids flutter, automatically, helplessly, and the light returns like a punishment. Harsh, white, flat. You gasp, not because you can see, But because you can't, not well, not fully, the edges are blurred. Shapes dance where there should be stillness. Your eyes feel sunburned, frozen, bruised from the inside. You try to sit up. Someone pushes you gently back. Rest, says a voice. You're doing much better. You almost laugh, but your mouth is dry. Your throat hurts. And besides, laughter is too warm. They leave you alone again in the half-light with your ruined sight and your soaked pillow. You turn your face away from the window. Even the sun feels suspicious now. You've had breakfast, if you call broth breakfast. Now you lie down and receive therapy. Bleeding, blistering, and yes, leeches. Welcome to medicine. You wake to movement, not your own. Yours has been reduced to the occasional shiver, but someone else's. There's a soft rustle of linen, the scrape of metal on wood, the clink of glass. The smell arrives next. Iron, mold, earth after rain, and something else. Something sweet and rotting. Breakfast, they say, which is generous. They bring you a wooden bowl of tepid broth, thinner than memory, flavored with bone and distant carrots. You sip. It tastes like the breath of someone who once heard of food. Still, it warms your teeth for a moment. A luxury. You're grateful. Until they come for your blood. Because here in 1810, breakfast is not followed by rest. It's followed by drainage. The doctor, same black coat, same grim posture, approaches your bed like a priest before a ritual. He's holding a jar. You can't see what's inside, but you hear them squirm. Tiny, wet, hopeful bodies. The jar fogs as he opens it. Leeches. Of course it's leeches. They were bred in the basement. In a vat. Fed on butcher scraps and pig's blood. They're not creatures, not really. More like instruments. Or beliefs with teeth. In this room, they are considered more precise than a scalpel. More honest than prayer. The idea is simple, even elegant. You are full of too much. Too much blood. Too much energy. Too much unrest. The fever is only a symptom of this overabundance. And a leech? The leech restores balance. He places the first one on your forearm. It hesitates for a moment, then attaches. You feel the pinch. Not sharp, not painful. More like being kissed by something ancient. Something very old and very wet and very hungry. Another is placed at your neck. Another, your lower spine. They don't like to stop once they start. You're told not to move. As if you could. The little mouths swell with your warmth. They drink rhythmically, content, as if they found something divine in you, which in their defense they have. Your blood, your heat, your history. One nurse watches with academic interest. They're very intelligent, she says. They know when to let go. You don't respond, because the leeches aren't the problem. The problem is what they're preparing you for. The doctor leans closer. If this fails, he says, almost conversationally, we may consider the trephine. You blink. Trephine? He sees your confusion and clarifies, almost kindly, a small hole in the skull. To release the pressure. It relieves the fever. Sometimes, you realize he's talking about drilling your head open, as casually as others mention tea. And you begin to understand. Leeches are not the horror. They are the mercy. Because in the hierarchy of suffering, this is how it goes. First, bleeding. Then ice. Then leeches. Then the blade. The leeches bloat. Fat little monks of medicine. They finish without fanfare, roll off your skin, sluggish and gorged. One falls to the floor and bursts. No one reacts. The nurse steps on it softly, then scoops the mess into a cloth. Your arm is still bleeding. It will keep bleeding for a while. They say it's healthy. The wound should remain open, someone mutters. Let the fever escape. You lie there, pale and dripping, wondering how many people bled to death while waiting to be healed. Somewhere, you hear a scream. Not close, not urgent, just matter of fact. You remember the trephine, a circular saw for the skull. You imagine it pressing down on your forehead, the noise it might make, the sound of your own thoughts escaping like steam from a cracked pipe. You clutch your eyes shut. You pray, not for healing, but for delay, for the leeches to be enough. Because here, in this room of cold reason and warm knives, the logic is relentless. The body must obey. The fever must yield. The balance must be restored. And if it costs blood, then so be it. If it costs sight, that's regrettable. If it costs yourself, that's medicine. You're not a patient. You're a battlefield with veins. And the war continues. Cold wasn't just temperature. It was virtue. Heat was indulgent, decadent, feminine. Ice, stoic, noble, pure. The doctors weren't just healing. They were cleansing. You once thought of ice as simple. A season. A sensation. Something that clings to windows in the early dark and melts by mid-morning. A tool to keep wine chilled or cheeks flushed after too much sun. But here, in this bed, under this ceiling stained with prayers and soot, you begin to understand something else. Ice is not a thing. It's a belief. The leeches have been removed. The bleeding wiped clean. Your fever has dipped, but not disappeared. So now, they've returned to the cure they trust most. Cold. They don't even pretend it's for your comfort anymore. The air has been drawn deliberately from the room. The shutters are cracked just enough to invite the early winter mist. The sheets beneath your spine are damp. No one lights the stove. You're being preserved, like a pear in a jar. The doctor stands at the foot of your bed with his arms folded behind his back. He speaks, not to you, but over you, explaining the method to a student. His voice is calm, instructional. The body is governed by fire, he says, but the mind is frost. To restore reason, you must chill the flesh. And that's when it hits you. They're not fighting illness. They're fighting passion. Because heat in this world isn't just a symptom, it's a vice. Too much heat and you sweat. Too much heat and you speak too freely. Too much heat and you think strange thoughts. You dream. You lust. You rebel. It's no coincidence that women are considered warmer by nature, more prone to hysteria, fainting, dangerous moods. Nor is it a surprise that poets are often ill, that the fevered mind is the one most closely associated with genius and sin. To feel too much is a medical condition. So cold became correction. Doctors wrote entire treatises praising the moral value of the cold bath. They believed it could extinguish vanity, soften pride, silence impure thoughts. Young girls were encouraged to bathe in icy water daily to strengthen their virtue. Monks pressed snow to their loins to kill desire. Widows were told not to cry too hotly, lest they risk inflammation. Even Napoleon, the architect of this era's order, kept his rooms cool. He slept with windows open in January. He thought it made him sharper, less human, more weapon. The frost, you see, is not just physical. It's philosophical. It is self-denial. It is structure. It is purity of the highest kind. And it is everywhere. In the marble floors of hospitals. In the unlit corners of schools. In the chilled ink of anatomy books. And now inside you. You try to sit up, but your limbs are lead. The cold has numbed you into compliance. A nurse approaches with another compress. This one soaked in a vinegar solution chilled with fragments of snow, and places it over your heart. A small gesture, a statement. Your emotions are running too warm. She says nothing, just tightens the linen across your chest and walks away. Like this is normal. Like freezing a soul is the same thing as saving it. You close your eyes, half from exhaustion, half from despair. And for a brief moment, you imagine warmth. Not the sickly kind of fever, but the soft heat of bread, the golden heat of a lover's hand, the afternoon sun on a windowsill. And then you remember that in this world, those things are considered decadent. dangerous. And slowly, the warmth inside you becomes guilt, becomes shame, becomes silence. That is the power of this philosophy. It doesn't just numb the body, it disciplines the self. You're not being treated. You're being shaped, not into someone healthy, but into someone cold enough to be called cured. Let's wander into a French salon. Gilded mirrors, powdered wigs, and a fashionable terror of internal heat. It was trendy to freeze your body back into virtue. You're no longer in your bed. Not physically. No, you're still wrapped in stiff linen, skin cold enough to hum. But in the drifting, fevered folds of imagination, you have left the hospital behind. Welcome, then, to Paris. Not the Paris of postcards, but the one buried under powdered wigs, whalebone corsets, and the scent of lavender rotting beneath layers of civility. The air is heavy with perfume and politics, gossip and guilt. You're in a salon. What are the good ones? There are candles flickering against the mirror-lined walls, but they provide no warmth. Only reflection. Dozens of reflections. 1,000 versions of each guest. Each flaw magnified. Each wrinkle cataloged. The room glitters, but it's cold. Not just in temperature, but in tone. Everyone here is fighting the same invisible war. The battle against heat. A woman beside you, draped in silk, chin powdered, corset cruelly tight, fans herself with nervous precision. Not because she's hot, but because warmth is suspicious. She's been trained to fear her own pulse. Her cheeks must stay pale, her skin dry. Emotion is embarrassing. Sweat is scandal. Next to her, a young man sips water laced with crushed mint and shaved ice. The ice was brought in from the Alps in blocks, stored all summer in deep cellars lined with straw. It's rare, expensive, and above all moral. He winces as he drinks. His teeth ache. That's the point. It's not enough to appear calm. You must consume cold. You must swallow your virtue. Literally. Your host tonight is a physician's daughter. She doesn't smile. Smiling warms the face. She speaks in a practiced whisper, measured analytical, the language of salons. She's a range of performance, a discussion of new medical theories about how the brain cooks itself in grief. Everyone nods, politely, as if mourning is just another illness that needs refrigeration. Behind her, a mirror taller than a door reflects the room's disapproval in stunning clarity. The guests check it constantly, not for beauty, but for temperature. They want to be sure their faces are not too red, their eyes not too bright, their bodies not too present. Too much presence implies too much feeling. And too much feeling, well, that leads to madness, to illness, to humiliation. This obsession with coolness has become its own religion. Cold is no longer just a cure. It's fashion. It's virtue signaling with a velvet ribbon. Ice on the wrists. Snow baths in the countryside. Clay masks chilled overnight to firm the flesh and silence desire. Heat, by contrast, is low class. Peasants sweat. Workers flush. Mothers moan during childbirth. The elite are cool. Even in death, they are posed with frozen fingers. Rigor mortis becomes a final aesthetic choice. You walk past a pair of men arguing softly by the piano. One insists that warm milk stokes melancholy. The other counters that even warm hands might compromise one's moral clarity. They laugh, but it isn't funny. Because in this age of ice and mirrors, the body is constantly watched. Not for health, but for control. And the mirrors? The mirrors never forgive. They reflect even the faintest blush as proof of failure. You begin to realize something. This isn't medicine. It's performance art. These people are not cold by accident. They're cold by design. They have chosen it. They wear it. They preach it. And you, lying in your bed in that quiet Parisian hospital, are simply the logical extension of that culture. Where others flirt with frost, you are immersed in it. Where they dab ice on their temples like perfume, you are being preserved like fruit. Not for health, but for virtue. You blink. The salon fades. The mirror shatters quietly inside your mind. You're back in your bed, back in your damp sheets, back under the cloth soaked in the water that once touched another patient's pulse. The philosophy of frost lingers like smoke in your lungs. And as you drift again, between waking and forgetting, you whisper to yourself, virtue should not be so cold. But no one hears you, because in an age of ice and mirrors, warmth is always a little dangerous. And mirrors? They never blink. You're surrounded by coughing, blindness, mutism, but no one talks about it. It's not disease. It's imbalance. And what's imbalanced can be corrected. There are things no one says aloud in this room. They drift in the air like dust, cling to the corners like cobwebs in a church. You can smell them. You can feel them. But no one speaks them. Not directly. Not here. Here, illness is not what you think. It is not a name, not a label. It is a tendency, a leaning, a slight decline of the fluids. You are not sick. That would be vulgar. You are merely out of order, slightly off tune, and therefore fixable. It begins with a cough. Not yours. Someone else's. Raspy. Wet. A few beds down. The kind of sound that once, in a different century, would have cleared a room. But here it does nothing. No one flinches. No one turns. It happens every morning, every night, every silence. That same cough, like a metronome, counting down to something no one wants to name. He's a boy, you think. Maybe 17. His skin is the color of candle wax, and his eyes are the blue of old bruises. You've never seen him sit up. He doesn't cry. He just coughs, and coughs, and coughs, and no one says a word. They say it's nervous imbalance, or melancholic retention, or vapor congestion. Never consumption, never plague, never fear, because fear invites questions. And here, questions are not therapeutic. A woman across from you stares endlessly at the ceiling. Her hands are folded like a prayer someone gave up on. You've seen her eyes blink, but never her mouth move. Not once. Not even when a nurse cleaned the blood from her nightgown and said softly, "You're much calmer today." Calmer. That's the word they use when a person stops reacting. When the body gives up the fight. When the soul goes quiet. There's another man, 2 beds over, who used to scream in the middle of the night. Nothing coherent. Just the kind of screaming that makes your skin fold in on itself. Now he doesn't scream. Doesn't speak. His lips move like a priest at confession, but no sound comes out. They call it mutism. They call it progress. You begin to see the pattern. Symptoms that speak too loudly are silenced. Those that behave are rewarded. Blindness is gentle. Stillness is praised. Death is just the final harmony of the humors. No one talks about why so many patients go blind here. Not from illness. From treatment. You want to ask, but your voice still feels distant. Like it lives in a different room. You know what will happen if you ask. The nurse will say, "Don't worry. We're keeping it under control." It, not the cough, not the mutism, not the bleeding. Just it. That strange, unspoken menace that medicine always dances around. There is no panic here. No urgency. Because the patients do not die dramatically. They fade. Gradually. 1 sense at a time. Some lose their hearing. Some lose their language. Some forget how to move. But all of them are very, very quiet. It's the kind of quiet that doesn't feel restful. It feels practiced, encouraged, manufactured, and you begin to realize something horrible. The doctors are not failing to stop the epidemic. They're part of it. They've mistaken surrender for healing. They've renamed symptoms until they sound like virtues. They've prescribed silence so often, they've forgotten what noise was for. You wonder, briefly what would happen if you screamed. Not in pain, not in madness, just to break the silence, just to say, this isn't working, but your throat is raw, your lips are cracked, and you've already been called calm. So instead, you listen to the coughing boy, to the woman's stillness, to the whispering lips of the silent man, and you understand. These are not side effects. They are outcomes. They are the cure, not for disease, but for discomfort, for unpredictability, for being too human. And as the candle burns low and your body sinks again into its damp, shivering shell, you realize the truth no one says. The real epidemic here is obedience, and it's spreading beautifully. You dream, half awake, in a room lined with white tile, ice packs on your skull, a nun whispering prayers. It's not hell. It's the Hotel Dieu in Paris. You don't remember falling asleep. You only remember waking up from a dream that never truly ended. One where the world was too white, too still, too cold to be real, but too structured to be chaos. The kind of dream that doesn't drift, it waits. Patient, geometric, like the room you're in. White walls, white ceiling, white beds, and floors of marble. Not polished, not beautiful, just practical, just hard. The kind of stone that keeps cold deep in its core long after the fire has died. The kind that echoes when boots cross it, like a verdict being read. Final, unblinking. This isn't a hospital. This is a monument to order. You're in the Hotel Dieu, the oldest hospital in Paris, or what remains of it. A place older than the empire itself, older than your body, older than your fever. It's been here for centuries, absorbing pain like salt into stone. The saints no longer walk these halls, but something else does. Something colder. Your back aches, not from illness, but from the slab beneath you. The mattress is little more than burlap in size. The bed frame doesn't creak because it doesn't move. Nothing here moves unless it's told to. Not even you. You try to lift your arm. It resists. Not from weakness, from weight. There's an ice pack strapped across your chest now. Another across your scalp. They've soaked the cloth again in snow water. It seeps down your neck like the ghost of winter, whispering that you are too warm, that you must be silenced. The fever pulses beneath your ribs, steady but defiant. Your body, like Paris, refuses to submit completely. But it's close. The nun returns. Her face is as unreadable as the stone beneath your body. Her footsteps are soundless. She carries a rosary and a bowl of something sharp-smelling. Vinegar? Spirits? It doesn't matter. She doesn't look at you, not really. She looks at the fever inside you, the idea of you, the thing that needs taming. She mutters a prayer, something about purification, something about still waters. She dips her cloth and presses it to your forehead. Your skin flinches. She doesn't. This is not cruelty. This is duty, and that is the strangest part. No one here is trying to harm you. Not intentionally. They believe in this. They believe in cold floors and cold cures and cold saints who watched over cold patients. They believe in the room. You blink, and it begins again. The dream. You're walking now. Not really walking, just floating down the long hallway that loops around the hospital like a snake trying to remember its own tail. The marble reflects the light in ways that trick the eye. Makes it feel like time has doubled back. Like you're following yourself. The doors on either side are closed. Behind them, more silence. More stillness. You hear breathing, but not from lungs. From walls. This place is alive. But not kind. There are voices. Murmurs of Latin. Of science. Of hymns rewritten as protocols. You try to find a source, but your body won't follow. Your legs ache. Your mouth tastes like metal and ghosts. You keep moving anyway. At the end of the hallway, a basin. Inside, snow melting into blood. Or maybe the other way around. You bend to look closer and see your own face. Eyes red, lips blue, pupils wide and startled, like someone remembering the sun from a time before memory. You reach out to touch the water, and wake again. Back in the room, back on the stone, back under the cloth. The nun is gone. The ice remains. Outside, a bell tolls. It could be for dinner, or death, or both. Someone is crying in the distance, or laughing. In this place, the two sound similar. You turn your head and stare at the wall. It doesn't blink. You start to count the tiles. 1, 2, 300, 3,000. You lose track, but the room never loses you. Because this place, this marble room, was not made for healing. It was made for waiting. Waiting for the fever to leave, or the soul, whichever departs first. Some believed ice could trap madness, like a cold prison for the brain. Legend says a mad poet once awoke sane after being buried in snow. You're no longer certain what day it is. Your mind wanders, sometimes gently, like a leaf downriver, other times violently, like a carriage while catching on stone. The fever is still there, humming like a distant orchestra, but quieter now. It has learned to whisper, and in that whisper, stories begin to surface. Not from science, from memory, from myth. They don't tell you these stories during treatment, but you hear them anyway, in the muttering of the older nurses, in the cryptic comments from patients whose tongues have forgotten modern grammar, in the way even the doctors pause, just slightly, when the ice touches your skin. Because behind the gauze and the vinegar and the Latin, there is something older at work here. An old belief, half scientific, half sacred. Cold doesn't just soothe, it seals. In the old days, before charts, before thermometers, before the word neurology, they believed that madness was movement, a kind of spiritual tremor, a vibration in the soul, thoughts spinning too fast, ideas unraveling into the ether. And ice. Ice was the stillness that could catch them. They believed that if you cooled the head deeply, completely, you could slow the chaos, contain the storm, freeze the wildness of the mind like a moth trapped in amber. One legend, often whispered by medical students after hours, tells of a poet in Geneva. Brilliant, unhinged. His thoughts raced too fast for paper. He once climbed a bell tower and tried to speak to the moon. When brought down, shaking and half naked, they buried him in snow up to his neck just to calm him, just for a moment. And the next morning, he was calm, clear-eyed, quiet. He wrote a sonnet before breakfast and never screamed again. They say the snow had trapped the fever behind his eyes, or maybe it had frightened the demons into stillness. No one is sure, but the story persisted. And by the time you arrived in this world, wrapped in linen, head heavy with fire, those stories had hardened into protocol. The doctors may not admit it, but they still believe. They speak of lowering cerebral excitation, inducing temporary stasis, reducing cortical inflammation. But really, they're trying to do what the snow once did. Capture the mind. Hold it still. Make it quiet. You feel it in the way they handle your skull. Reverently, almost like it's a vessel that might spill. You see it in their eyes, bright with curiosity but dimmed with fear. No one truly understands what happens when the mind breaks. They only know it moves, and moving things must be frozen. So you lie there, wrapped in cloth, pressed beneath ice, not quite asleep, not quite awake. Somewhere between your ears, thoughts slow, words detach from meaning. You remember faces from dreams you never had. You hear your mother's voice, though she's been gone for years. You try to speak her name. Only vapor escapes. You're not crazy. Not yet. But you are very, very still. And that stillness is sacred to them. The nurse comes in and places her fingers on your temple. She murmurs something, not French, not Latin. Older. You can't tell if it's a blessing or a diagnosis. You think of the poet, of the snow, of what it means to have your madness paused. Not cured, not erased, just put on ice. You wonder what happens when it thaws. Does it return stronger, sharper, more cruel? Or does it melt into something else entirely? You don't know. No one does. But as your breath fogs the air and your heartbeat matches the quiet rhythm of melting water, you begin to understand. The cold isn't just a treatment. It's a spell. And you're not just a patient. You're the offering. Medieval saints were said to cool fevers with their breath. By 1800, medicine tried to mimic miracles. Artificial frost, industrial sanctity. You've begun to dream in fragments. Not in stories, not in scenes. Just objects. A melting candle, a bare foot on tile, the glassy eye of a statue watching from the corner of a chapel. And always the cold breath of something unseen. It exhales across your chest in the early hours, just before the nurses wake, just after the bells sleep. A chill that doesn't enter through windows or cracks in stone. It comes from somewhere else. From inside. You're told it's the fever, but something deeper tells you otherwise. Because long before the doctors brought ice into hospitals, saints brought it into miracles. They were cold, these saints, not in spirit, but in legend. Their holiness was measured not in warmth, but in their ability to quiet heat, to cool the boiling blood of sinners, to draw fevers from the bodies of children with nothing but their breath. There was St. Hugh of Lincoln, who touched a burning monk's forehead and left behind a layer of frost. St. Benedict, who was said to sleep on stone slabs in the dead of winter to draw the devil's fire out of his mind. St. Dymphna, patron of the mad, who breathed across the eyes of a trembling woman and left her blank with peace. They didn't heal with heat. They healed with cold. You see them now in the hospital's chapel. Not that you've walked there, of course. Your legs are still folded in linen, your feet like marble themselves, but you remember it, or imagine it. You're not sure anymore which is which. The chapel is silent, austere. The statues lining the walls are pale and hollow-cheeked. Their robes seem carved from fog. Their hands stretch not in blessing, but in quiet refusal. No more tears, no more heat, no more fire. Above the altar, St. Ludmilla stares down. Her story was one of gentleness. She nursed the ill with snow gathered in a silver bowl. She believed pain was a flame, and her duty was to extinguish it, slowly, reverently. They say those who were touched by her hands shivered before they sighed. That's the word the old nurses still use here, sigh. Not scream, not shake, not weep. The ideal patient, they say, is the one who sighs, who releases the fever without a fight, who melts into stillness, like candle wax returned to stone. In the early 1800s, as medicine stepped forward into science, it did not shed its saints. It replicated them. Only now, instead of prayer, there were procedures. Instead of relics, refrigeration. Instead of holy breath, industrial snow. Some hospitals had frost rooms, where air was deliberately chilled using ice harvested from frozen lakes. Not for comfort, but for correction. Patients were brought there to calm their nerves, to discipline the blood, to emulate the calm of the saints without needing the saints themselves. Because holiness was no longer supernatural. It was replicable, measurable, clinical, and yet, deep down, they still believed. The doctors never said so out loud. That would have been unscientific. But the way they handled the ice, the way they whispered to each other when a patient's fever broke with no explanation, the way they glanced toward the chapel when someone recovered too fast, they knew, or maybe just hoped, that something divine remained in the frost. You can feel it now in your chest. Not warmth, not relief, something else. A cold peace. The kind that doesn't promise life, but promises quiet. The kind of peace the saints left behind. You breathe out slowly, and for a moment, you see it, a shimmer in the air above your skin. Not steam, not vapor, something more like memory, like a sigh carved into snow. They will say you're improving, that the fever has been drawn out, but you'll know better. It wasn't the compresses. It wasn't the bloodletting. It wasn't the tinctures. It was the ghosts of the saints, the breath of stillness, the frost in your bones. And tonight, as the candles are snuffed and the corridors fall silent, you whisper, not a prayer, but a promise. Let me not burn again. And the frost listens. Let's visit an apothecary. Smells of lavender, sulfur, burnt sugar. Beneath the jars, chunks of imported ice, rare and revered. Ice is medicine. Ice is myth. You're no longer in the hospital bed. Not entirely. Your body remains under linen and weight, but your mind wanders, as it so often does now, to a place quieter than the ward and colder than the marble. A shop, not grand, not ostentatious. A single door tucked beneath a crooked sign. Letters half faded, painted by hand. Apothecary. You can almost hear the bell above the frame jingle as you enter, the sound delicate and apologetic, like it's not sure whether it has the right to interrupt your thoughts. Inside, dim light, amber glass, shadowed corners. The air tastes like sleep and science. Lavender, sulfur, burnt sugar, and underneath it all, the unmistakable breath of ice. Not the wild kind, not the blizzard kind, the domesticated kind. Ice that has been collected, packed in sawdust, hidden under floorboards. Ice that traveled weeks from a mountain lake to rest quietly in the dark belly of this room. The apothecary himself is not what you expect. Not a kindly old man, not a villain, just precise. His fingers stained, his posture sharp, his eyes constantly scanning, jars, ledgers, your skin. He does not speak unless prompted, but when he does, it is in exact terms, like every word is part of a chemical formula. He opens a cabinet. Small vials glint in the candlelight. Tincture of laudanum, oil of clove, dried valerian root, bundled like shrunken flowers. And then, below it all, hidden behind a false panel, a compartment of melting truth. The icebox, no handles, just cold. It escapes like a confession when the drawer opens. You feel it on your skin before you see it. And when you do, blocks of clear frost, wrapped in cloth, humming faintly with the memory of distant snow. This is not hospital ice. This is apothecary ice. It is not common, not institutional. It is personal, purchased by the gram, offered like incense, prescribed like prayer. He takes a chip no larger than a coin and places it into a ceramic dish, then a drop of lavender oil, a sliver of camphor bark. He watches the mix not boil, not sizzle, just settle. The scent rises like a ghost. He hands it to you. Hold it near the temples. He says, think of nothing but frost. Let the heat retreat. And you do. Your fingers tingle. The cold slides into your forehead like a second thought. Not pain, not even relief, just distance, a kind of mental white space where fear cannot root. He watches you closely, not because he doubts the result, because he reveres it. You're not a customer. You are a ritual. In 1810, the apothecary was more than a dispenser of herbs. He was a keeper of elements, of fire and ash, of salt and thyme. But most sacred of all was ice. Ice was luxury. Ice was modernity. Ice was belief. For those who could afford it, coldness was a prescription in itself. Fevers were not merely treated. They were refined, sculpted, cooled gently like wax under a candle. Nothing was rushed here, because here, medicine was not just chemistry. It was theater. The box was replenished every few days. A horse-drawn cart would arrive before dawn, carrying straw-packed crates of crystal slabs. Some of the ice came from the north, near Geneva. Others from the Seine, when winter was kind enough. Always hidden, always expensive. Rumors said the emperor's physician once requested a private delivery. That Napoleon himself had his temples iced before battles. That clarity of mind came with cold. The apothecary never confirmed it, but the ice never denied it either. You lean back slightly, the chill on your skin now joined by the fragrance of herbs and old wood. The dish is nearly empty. The last drop of oil has curled against the frozen shard like a dying question. You feel no cure, but you feel composed. And in 1810, that's enough. The apothecary takes the bowl, nods, and closes the drawer. The room warms by a single degree. You exhale, back in your hospital bed, your eyes open to the pale ceiling. The nurses move around you like ghosts in cotton. You almost believe your journey was real. A memory, a moment, a visit to the coldest kind of sanctuary. You close your eyes again, slowly, and whisper, let the heat retreat. Somewhere, in a cellar beneath a crooked door, the ice waits. Still, patient, holy. Doctors believe the brain was a firebox. Too much thinking, overheated, too much poetry, dangerous. You had to cool it down or lose your mind. There's something sacred about the human skull. You feel it now, under the ice-wrapped linen cinched tightly to your brow. A dull ache pulses beneath it, like steam knocking at the walls of a sealed room. It's not pain, not yet, but pressure. Something wants out, and in 1810, they would tell you exactly what that something is. Heat, not the good kind, not the sun on your face kind. No, this is mental heat, philosophical combustion. Your thoughts are burning faster than your body can cool them, which means you are in danger. Not of fever, but of thinking too much. It seems absurd to us now, doesn't it? That the brain could boil, that reflection could rot the nervous system, that poetry could scald the mind. But for the doctors walking these stone corridors, it was undeniable. They had seen it, again and again. The philosopher who collapsed mid-lecture and woke up babbling. The artist who painted for 6 days straight, then clawed at his face in the street. The widow who read too many novels and fainted in the pews. They were not tragic. They were overheated. The skull, they believed, was a furnace, a sealed chamber. Thought was a fire. And like any fire, if it grew too large, it consumed the oxygen. It cracked the bricks. It escaped. So the solution was simple. Cool the skull. Cool the thoughts. Cool the soul. And if the patient loses a few words in the process, if their eyes go dim or their memory fades or they no longer recognize their own name, well, at least the fire is out. You feel it now. This theory wrapped around your head like doctrine. The compress on your scalp is changed every hour, always colder than the last. Vinegar, camphor, iced rose water, a rotation of chill designed not to comfort, but to extinguish. You try to speak. The words arrive out of order. Your tongue is slow. Your mind feels like it's moving through smoke. They nod. Good, they say. You're calming. You're cooling. They do not ask what you were thinking about. They do not want to know. Because in this time, thought is heat, and heat is corruption. It wasn't just illness they feared. It was imagination. Too much imagination, and the pulse quickens. The face flushes. The eyes brighten. These are not symptoms. They are warnings. The doctors had charts, lists, descriptions of cranial inflammation. Signs included sudden insight, heightened awareness, racing speech, an uncontrollable desire to write or confess or cry. You had a dream last night, something wild and strange. You stood in a burning library. The books had no titles. The words inside them floated untethered off the page. You could read all of them at once. You felt brilliant, radiant, You woke up with ice being pressed to your temples. A nurse whispered, "Too much heat in the brain." You smiled. Just a little. That was a mistake. Because in this room, smiling without instruction is suspicious. It might be a spark. It might mean you've begun to burn again. You wonder what they would have done with minds like Pascal, or Kierkegaard, or any child who looked at the stars and felt something move in their chest. Would they have iced them, bound them, broken them with good intentions? Probably, because order cannot risk wildfire. You hear the doctor returning. His shoes tap on the tile. You close your eyes, still smiling beneath the linen. He doesn't see it. You're too tired to explain, and too smart to try, because in this world, a cool head is not a metaphor. It is a mandate, and your skull, that sacred furnace of memory and meaning, is not yours anymore. It belongs to the cold. There was something beautiful they thought about freezing. Unlike pus or blood, it was quiet, clean. If you died under ice, you died pure. You wouldn't call it peace, but you wouldn't call it pain either. It's a strange thing how dying slowly in a cold room can begin to feel like cleanliness, like a final kind of order. The nurses don't speak of death, not directly, but you can see it in their posture, in the way they change your linens without looking at your face, in the way they pause just slightly when your breath grows shallow. Not out of fear, out of respect, because in this era, a death under frost isn't tragic. It's elegant. It's correct. You see, death wasn't always about terror and screaming and sweat-soaked sheets. That was the death of peasants, of fools who boiled alive from the inside, spitting blood, crying out, clinging to heat. But you were dying coolly, without a sound, without a stain. And that, in 1810, is not a failure. It's an aesthetic, a moral one. To die under ice was, in some circles, a kind of purification. The fire of the flesh extinguished. The sins of the skin washed away in a gentle frost. The body slowing until it resembled marble. Not just cold, but untouched. Holy. Some believe the soul slipped out more easily in the cold. That warmth trapped it, made it cling to the bone. But if the body were chilled, the soul could rise like breath in winter air, silent, white, free. You remember the boy 2 beds down. He stopped coughing yesterday. No announcement. No chaos. Just stillness. They wrapped him in white cloth. Not burial shrouds, just clean sheets. They didn't weep. They didn't pray. They simply nodded. He passed well. That's what they said. Well, because the goal isn't survival. It's serenity. And there is no serenity more prized than the kind found in a body cooled by intention, calmed by routine, silenced by temperature. A warm death was considered vulgar. Too loud, too wet, sweat, bile, screams. All of it spoke of unresolved desire. Heat was passion, need, clinging, and that was unbecoming. But cold? Cold was a bow, a surrender, a final exhale in the key of virtue. There were even instructions in some hospitals, unwritten of course, that patients near death should be iced just slightly, just enough to slow the process, to preserve dignity, as if freezing your limbs would somehow polish the soul. It was not uncommon for families to request cold packs for the dying, a fashionable death, a modest death, one that could be observed without offense. One that did not disturb the mirrors. You feel it now, don't you? The numbness creeping inward, not like fear, but like completion. The fingertips, the nose, the lips, not gone, just quiet. The nurse returns. Her hand is gloved in cloth. She replaces the compress on your forehead with one a degree colder. She doesn't speak. She hums maybe a hymn you don't know, something wordless. Something frostbitten. You want to ask if she knows, if she understands that you're fading. Not dramatically, not painfully, just neatly. But you don't ask, because part of you believes it too. That an icy death is a better one. That it's easier to let go when you're already forgetting what warmth feels like. That stillness is not just surrender, it's art. And so you lie there, still beneath the cloth, bones settling into silence. If this is death, it is a polite one. A white page, a clean breath, a closing that doesn't echo. And far above, where the ceiling blurs into shadow, a voice you never learned begins to whisper. You passed well, not beautifully, not bravely, but well, as if that were the best a soul could hope for. Women were particularly vulnerable. Ice was used to cure hysteria, lust, and grief. You didn't need therapy. You needed temperature control. You hear her before you see her. Somewhere on the other side of the curtain, fabric thin enough to let the light through, but not the names, a woman is crying. Not loudly, not theatrically, just insistently, like someone trying to grieve without permission. It's not unusual, it's unwelcome, because here, in 1810, a woman's body was not a question to explore. It was a problem to solve, a volatile vessel, a weather pattern of unpredictable storms, hot one moment, cold the next, prone to tremors, prone to tears, prone to heat. And heat, as you've learned, is the root of all suspicion. Her sobs grow louder. You hear footsteps, quick, annoyed, not alarmed. A voice says something soft and sharp, the rustle of linen, then silence. You know what they've done? They've iced her. Maybe the back of her neck, maybe the soles of her feet, maybe her belly, where they believe grief liked to fester. It's not punishment, it's prescription. Because for women, cold wasn't just a cure for fever. It was the antidote to emotion. Hysteria, they called it. A diagnosis so broad it could mean anything. Sadness, anger, longing, laughter at the wrong moment. A craving for touch. A refusal to marry. A refusal to stay married. A refusal to be quiet. And the treatment? Ice. Always ice. Pressed to the womb. To the breasts. To the temples. If a woman mourned too long, ice. If she resisted her role, ice. If she confessed to dreams that wandered beyond the domestic, ice. It wasn't about healing. It was about cooling. Cooling the spirit. Cooling the nerve. Cooling the will. In the hospitals, there were wards just for women like her. White rooms filled with sighs and compresses. Doctors who didn't examine so much as contain. Nurses who spoke of calm like it was the highest virtue, the final goal. She's very still now. She's cooling well. We'll keep her on the regimen until the excitement leaves her. Excitement. That was the word they used for anything inconvenient. She could be excited because she had lost a child, because her husband struck her, because her thoughts no longer obeyed the outlines of a cookbook or a prayer. The solution was always the same. Lower the temperature, slow the pulse, flatten the emotion like a wrinkle in a dress. You feel it on your own skin now, a kind of secondhand cold. The air around you has shifted, not colder, but more judgmental. The room seems to watch her, not with sympathy, with expectation. She must return to stillness, to silence, to virtue, because in this age, a woman's warmth was dangerous. Not just for her, but for everyone. It could spread, like fever, like fire. And so, they froze it. You think of Saint Dymphna again, patron of the mad, the mournful, the misunderstood. They never tell the end of her story in the chapel. How she was killed for refusing her father's command. How they canonized her not for what she survived, but for how quietly she died. She became the model. Not the woman who rebelled, but the woman who froze beautifully. The woman behind the curtain has stopped crying. Or perhaps she hasn't. Perhaps the cloth has been soaked and tied across her face now, chilled with snow, to remind her that her sorrow is seasonal, and winter is eternal. You lie still, not from pain, but from awareness. You understand now. The ice was never just about the fever. It was never just about you. It was about containment, of grief, of desire, of heat that dared to speak. And tonight, as your own breath fogs the air, you whisper not a prayer, but a quiet resistance. Let her burn if she needs to, but no one hears you, because the room is too cold for hope, and too proud of its stillness to allow fire. Here's the fun part. The eye. Soft, delicate, vulnerable, and often iced. Some treatments included shaving ice in a powder and packing it under the eyelids. Let's talk about eyeballs. Not the metaphysical windows to the soul version. Not the glistening metaphors poets love to place in the center of sonnets. No, we're talking about the actual thing. The orb. Wet, round, soft like overripe fruit. The part of you that bruises at a whisper. It blinks. It weeps. It reveals. And in 1810, that made it dangerous. Doctors were obsessed with it, not out of awe, but out of fear. The eye was believed to be the primary exit point for inner disorder. Madness? It shimmered in the pupil. Hysteria? It clung to the edges of the iris. Fevers, delirium, temptation. They all fled the body through the gaze, like spirits seeking open windows. And what do you do with a window during a storm? You shut it. Tightly. Forcefully. Repeatedly. That's where the ice came in. You remember the first time they iced your eyes. You weren't warned. Just a sudden weight on the lids. A sting. A cold that burned hotter than fire. At first, you thought they were making a mistake. That the compress had slipped. But then they did it again. And again. And again. Because it was intentional. A standard treatment. The medical term? Ocular cooling to reduce neuroexcitability. The real term? Snow in the face. In some institutions, they shaved ice into fine powder, like sugar for a cake, and gently packed it into linen sachets. These sachets were then pressed to the eyes, or worse, tucked beneath the lids. Just for a moment, they'd say, to stop the trembling, to settle the vision, to quiet the chaos behind the cornea. They believed the eye was not just a sense, but a leak. It leaked truth. It leaked feeling. It leaked fire. So they cooled it, controlled it, closed it. If your eyes watered good, that meant the toxins were being expelled. If your vision blurred, that was expected. A temporary sacrifice for long-term stillness. If you couldn't see by morning, well, the fever was probably to blame. Never the treatment. Never the method. You know this because it happened to the boy next to you. Thin, with lashes like ink strokes. They iced his face every 2 hours. Said he'd been hallucinating, seeing angels or devils, or his dead brother's name spelled in candlelight. The solution? Ice to the sockets. Direct. Unapologetic. Now he doesn't see it all. His eyes are open, but empty. No light. No recognition. Just a soft, unfocused gaze that hovers inches above his own mortality. They say he's recovering. They always say that. You blink. Carefully. Your own vision has dulled around the edges. The room smears. Shapes don't stay where they're supposed to. The candle by the window bleeds into 2, then 3. You can't remember the last time your eyes felt warm. We're safe. And still they come. Another nurse. Another bowl. Another press of ice against the thin veil between your soul and the world. This time, they don't speak. They just nod. Your consent is no longer required. You're not being treated. You're being sealed. The eye is too expressive, too alive. It must be muffled like a mouth that talks too much. Covered. Silenced. And somewhere inside you, a quiet rebellion stirs. A question too small to speak aloud. What is so afraid of us seeing? Is it the truth of the body? The failure of the method? The fact that healing has never looked like this? You don't know, but your eyes do. They always have. That's why they're closing them. Not to save you, to protect themselves. By now, you've noticed something. Half your ward is blind. Permanently. But no one blames the cure. They say blindness is a sign the body was too far gone. It starts to sink in slowly. Not in a flash of horror. Not in a theatrical moment of revelation. Just a quiet knowing, the kind that creeps up behind you and lays a hand on your shoulder like an old friend. Half the people in this room can't see. And no one talks about it. Not the nurses. Not the doctors. Not the patients themselves, most of whom now sit or lie with the strange stillness of people who have learned to stop searching the air with their eyes. You hear them first. The blind walk differently, slower. Their heels never quite leave the ground. They rely on the sound of the floor, the sigh of curtains, the shuffle of distant feet. They navigate the cold corridors not with sticks or words, but memory, the number of steps from bed to basin, the exact distance to the wall. One man counts aloud. 14 to the window, he whispers to himself. 7 to the door. Another has started tapping his cup before drinking, just to know where the rim is. Another one no longer moves at all. And yet, there's no panic, no outrage, no grief, just acceptance. Because here, blindness is not a failure of treatment. It's just part of the journey. When it happens to you, if it happens to you, they will say the same things they said to the boy with the lashes, to the girl who cried herself blind, to the old man whose sight vanished during a snowpack procedure. His fever was too high. Her nerves were overexcited. The inflammation reached the optic root. Never, we iced the eyes too long. Never, the compress burned the cornea. Never, the body couldn't handle the cure. Because the treatment is sacred. The treatment is right. It is never questioned. If blindness occurs, then the illness must have already destroyed the sight. The patient must have waited too long. Their heat must have been too fierce. Their madness too deep. In that sense, blindness is almost a moral outcome. A confirmation that the patient was corrupted from within. And cold? Cold is exonerated every time. You remember one doctor explaining it to a young assistant. He was peeling a frost pack from a girl's face as he spoke. Some minds are too hot to survive intact, he said. This way, they return to stillness. Sight is not the price, it's the proof. Proof of healing. Proof of purification. Proof that the fire has finally been put out. And the terrifying thing? It works. Not medically. Culturally. The blind patients are often the quietest. The most docile. The most obedient. They don't resist anymore. They don't try to leave. They rarely speak. And when they do, it is with a kind of velvet resignation that softens the corners of the ward. They become what the doctors wanted all along. Still, cold, and blind. You try not to think about it. You try not to track the blurring in your own vision. Not to notice the way the light pools differently now. Not to notice how the shape of the window seems to melt at the edges. Not to notice how faces have become outlines. How outlines have become shadows. And how shadows don't leave. Because if you admit it, then you'll have to accept that you, too, are part of the process. That this wasn't a side effect. It was the plan. And so you lie still. Breathe slow. Listen for footsteps. And when you hear another patient being led by the hand, soft fingers guiding soft fingers, you don't say anything. Because here, the blind lead the cold, and the cold follow quietly. The 19th century doctor wore black, carried a cane, and spoke Latin. He didn't ask how you felt. He decided what you were, and prescribed cold accordingly. You hear him before you see him. He doesn't rush. He doesn't speak. His arrival is marked by silence, the silence of decision. The air tightens when he enters, like the ward itself is holding its breath. Conversations stop. Movements freeze. Even the candle flames seem to hesitate. The doctor, not a doctor. The doctor, the chief, the architect, the one with the notebook always half filled, never reviewed. His eyes are made of stone, and something colder than stone. He wears a black coat that never wrinkles, shoes that never squeak. He does not touch you with affection. He touches you with authority. He doesn't ask questions. He makes declarations. He does not ask, "Where does it hurt?" He announces, "The liver is overheated," or "The humors are in ascent," or simply, "We'll begin the full regimen." The nurses nod. You do not, because your consent was never part of the equation. In this room, the doctor is not a man of medicine. He is a priest of cold. Ice is his holy water. Snow his sacrament. Diagnosis is ritual. Treatment is doctrine. And the body? The body is the heretic that must be corrected, made silent, made still, made holy again. He carries a cane, but it's not for walking. It's for emphasis. It taps the foot of your bed when he wants you to wake. It raps against the tile when he's displeased. And when he raises it mid-sentence, you know someone's going under the snow that night. The cold is not optional. It is issued. It is ordained. You once overheard a conversation, two orderlies near the stairwell. They were whispering about a woman who screamed during an ice bath. Not because of pain, but because she saw something, visions, ghosts, herself in another life. When the doctor arrived, he didn't ask what she saw. He simply said, "Then she needs more. More ice. More cold. More silence." The idea, you see, is that the body cannot be trusted. Not its voice. Not its hunger. Not its instincts. Those things are relics of the animal. Primitive. Dangerous. And the doctor's job is to carve that out with frost. In another time, he might have used fire, leeches, chains. Now, he uses temperature. To see him walk from bed to bed is to watch a conductor scoring silence. He stops. He looks. He nods. He speaks in Latin. And the patient, whether they understand him or not, obeys. You've seen men lifted from their beds in the middle of the night just because he entered and didn't like the angle of their breath. You've seen ice applied to places where pain never lived just to satisfy a diagnosis no one else can pronounce. And you've learned to hold still, because in his presence, motion implies disobedience. Color suggests fever. Emotion smells like heat, and heat must be punished. You once caught his eye for too long, just a second too long. He narrowed his gaze and wrote something in the notebook. You didn't know what it said, but that evening, they iced your eyes again. 2 full hours. The message was clear. Don't look. Don't question. Cool down. He is not evil. He is worse, convinced. He believes in his methods. Believes that order is health. That numbness is peace. That your flesh, twitching with memory and fear, must be disciplined. He doesn't see you as a person. He sees you as a symptom, a fever wrapped in linen, a puzzle of fluids, a problem in search of frost. You wonder, sometimes, who taught him to worship cold, who froze him first, what fire he was running from. But you never ask, because the cane is watching, and the notebook remembers. And here, in this church of marble and medicine, you are not a believer. You are the altar, and ice is the only prayer allowed. Cold wasn't just physical, it was ideological. It became a method of power, of control, of conquest. Empires don't always burn. Some freeze you into obedience. You've been lying in your bed long enough to understand that cold is no longer just a temperature. It is a system, a strategy, a story that your body is forced to tell again and again in silence. But what if it isn't just your body? What if this frost, these rituals, these compresses, this obsession with stillness was never about medicine? What if it was about empire? You start to see it now, even through the blur at the edge of your vision. Not just the doctor, not just the nurses, but the whole structure around you, the rules, the corridors, the endless rhythm of hands and water and ice feels suspiciously like governance. And you're not a patient. You are a province, a small, trembling territory to be stabilized, pacified, reformed. You think about Napoleon, yes, that Napoleon, and how his empire stretched not just across borders, but deep into flesh. He wasn't content to conquer cities. He wanted order in the bloodstream, discipline in the lungs, obedience in the mind. And so the body became a metaphor, and metaphors became treatments. Because if an empire wants to last, it needs compliance. Not just laws, but temperature. A state that runs too hot, politically, emotionally, physically, is dangerous, rebellious, revolutionary. But a body that is cold, that is a body that won't rise, won't riot, won't dream. Napoleon's physicians weren't just healers. They were agents of policy. If a soldier grew too excited, too fevered, too impassioned, they called it nervous exaltation and prescribed cold immediately. Ice to the spine, snowpacks to the face. Because excitement could mean mutiny, could mean ideology. And ideology, unchecked, topples thrones. Back in the ward, you begin to count. Not the minutes, the methods. Cold for grief, cold for madness, cold for lust, cold for questions. Each one a correction, each one a message. Your heat is not welcome here. You remember the girl with the ink-stained fingers. She wrote poetry, not for publication, just for herself. She spoke too fast, too beautifully. Said things like, the moon has thoughts of its own. That was enough. They iced her arms, then her neck, then her mouth. When you asked where she went, the nurse said simply, she was too warm, and that was all. Cold, you see, is elegant. Burning people at the stake, brutal, but freezing them from the inside out, that's policy, that's civilization. Even in architecture, the empire celebrated chill. Hospitals modeled after barracks. Long halls with high ceilings. Open windows in winter to keep the air pure. But it wasn't about purity. It was about control. Heat makes people wild. Cold makes them quiet. An empire doesn't want you dead. It wants you frozen, preserved, obedient, decorative. So the treatments continue. The ice comes without warning. You are told to be grateful, because the body that cools is the body that survives, even if it no longer lives. You blink at the ceiling. The frost on a window has taken on a shape you can't name. It's spreading slowly, like a map being drawn by something ancient and tired. You wonder if the empires of the future will look like this too. Not armies, but ideologies of numbness. Therapies that flatten. Protocols that erase. Maybe they already do. And maybe that's the final truth. Some empires burn the world. Others freeze it. And only one of them lets you stay pretty while you disappear. Not everything was said. Not everything needed to be. In the icy wards of 1810, silence wasn't absence. It was currency. Proof that you'd accepted your place in the snow. You wake, but you don't move. Because to move would mean to disturb the silence. And here, silence is sacred. The kind of sacred that doesn't sing hymns or quote scripture. The kind of sacred that presses down gently, but firmly, like a gloved hand on your chest. You are expected to be still, to be soft, to be unobtrusive. Because in this world of ice and linen and whispered instructions, silence is not the absence of noise. It is the presence of surrender. It starts with the patience. Those who speak too often or too loudly are watched. Not punished, just watched. Corrected through treatment. Adjusted through temperature. You hear fewer words every day. Not because people have nothing to say, but because they've learned that saying it makes things colder. The woman who used to hum near the fireplace? Iced. The old man who told war stories at dawn? Iced. The boy who asked if the windows could be opened just once? Iced. The protocol is never written, but it's understood. Speak less. Shiver more. And it's not just speech that disappears. It's laughter. It's argument. It's opinion. The rich textures of sound that once filled this place are slowly scraped away, layer by layer, until the only thing left is the faint hiss of melting ice in a metal bowl. Even the nurses adopt the rhythm. Their footsteps are quieter now. Their voices drop into breathy monosyllables. Rest, still, cold. They don't speak to you anymore so much as at you. But the silence doesn't feel oppressive. That would be too easy to fight, too easy to notice. No, this silence is polite. It's elegant. It arrives like snow falling on velvet. No edges, no warning, just softness swallowing detail. You think about your own voice. When was the last time you used it? Not to cry, not to groan, not to say yes or please, but to ask a question, to remember a song, to say your name with intention. You can't recall, because silence in this place isn't imposed. It's inhaled, a slow compliance. It makes things easier. That's what the doctor said once, when asked about a patient who hadn't spoken in 3 weeks. The cold does half the work, he said, but silence finishes the job. He meant his praise. You begin to understand what he meant. When you stop speaking, things hurt less. You don't have to explain the numbness in your fingers or the way light now feels like pressure on your skin. You don't have to admit that you no longer dream in full colors, that your memories are starting to freeze too. Not vanish, just freeze, held in suspension. Perfect, untouched, unreachable, like a letter locked in a block of ice. Still yours, but no longer accessible. And that's the true elegance of it. Cold doesn't erase. It preserves. It quiets. It perfects. You in this state are untroubled, uncomplicated, unloud, a body at rest, a mind in storage. And the silence? It isn't lonely. It's exquisite. But here's the thing they don't tell you. Somewhere deep beneath the quiet, the body remembers what it's missing. The echo of your own voice still circles inside you like a wolf pacing in the dark, waiting for warmth, for noise, for the first word, the one you haven't said yet, the one that might break the frost. You don't say it, not yet, because even now, you can't decide. Is the silence killing you, or has it finally made you beautiful? You've seen death now. Not in screams or blood or chaos, but in stillness, in perfectly folded linens, in beds that remain made even as bodies leave them. The ideal death here is cold, silent, and obedient. Anything else is an embarrassment. The body is still, the sheets are smooth, and the air smells like camphor and resignation. Someone has died. You don't know her name. You never heard her speak. In fact, you're not even sure she did speak. She arrived 2 weeks ago, maybe 3, and had already mastered the posture of quiet compliance. Eyes down, mouth closed, wrists pale and unassuming. She was the perfect patient, and now she is the perfect corpse. No one cries. No one panics. A nurse comes in with a folded cloth and a small wooden cross. She pulls the curtain, not to protect her privacy, but to preserve the mood. A second nurse smooths the pillow. A third lights a single candle, just high enough to cast a faint halo across the wall. It's all choreographed, delicate, understated, almost elegant. Death, here, is not a rupture. It's a transition from stillness to silence to something colder than both. And the more beautifully you go, the more they admire you. They don't say it directly, of course, but it's in the glances, the subtle nods. You've seen the way they shake their heads when someone dies loud, messy, unprepared. That man last week, gasping, flailing, babbling about warmth and mothers and God. They talked about him like he'd failed something. Very agitated, they said. A shame, but this woman has passed the test. She went without a word, without protest, without clinging to the idea that her body still belonged to her. And that's what they want from you too. Not recovery, not rebellion, but graceful extinction. A death they can frame, catalog, admire, and perhaps more than anything, repeat. Because in this place, a peaceful death is not the end. It's an example. It justifies everything. The treatments, the procedures, the ice. See? They seem to say, it worked. She was too warm, too troubled, too noisy when she arrived. But look at her now. Perfectly cool, perfectly quiet, perfectly gone. You find yourself wondering, what would they say about you? Would your death be tidy enough? Or would you ruin the scene? Would you beg? Would you weep? Would you shiver the wrong way at the wrong time? You've seen enough to know that a bad death doesn't mean pain. It means disruption. Too much color. Too much sound. Too much humanity. That's the one thing they can't forgive. So you rehearse it sometimes, quietly, when no one's looking. Not your funeral, just a moment before. Your face turned gently toward the window. Your hands resting on the coverlet. Your lips parted just slightly, not in fear, but in quiet surrender. And maybe you'll whisper something. Not a name, not a prayer, just a single word that reminds you, briefly, that you once had heat in you. But then again, maybe not. Because even that might be too much. Even that could spoil the composition. And here, they don't want her death to feel real. They want it to be beautiful. There was someone in the bed next to yours. You remember their cough, the shape of their shoulders, the way they whispered to the wall at night. Then one morning, they were gone, and no one said a word. You remember him now only as an absence. A shape in the bed beside you. A sound. A breath that rasped like wind through old curtains. You never asked his name. He never offered it. And now that he's gone, you realize no one else did either. There's no plaque. No folded sheet. No candle by the window. Just an empty mattress already remade. As if he never lay there at all. You thought there'd be something. A nod. A glance. A whisper in the corridor. Did you hear? But the silence was immediate. Intentional. Sterile. One moment, he was there, coughing through the night, muttering to someone only he could see. And the next, the curtain was drawn. The bed stripped. A nurse carrying a basin that no longer steamed. No explanation. No farewell. Just nothing. And in that nothing, you begin to understand what it means to be forgotten. Not remembered poorly. Not misremembered, but erased. He didn't die beautifully. You know that much. He fought it. He moaned. He thrashed. He said things no one wanted to hear. About heat, about God, about how the cold was eating his bones from the inside out. They called him unstable. Said he had no dignity. That he'd gone mad. But maybe he was just telling the truth too early. Maybe the cold hadn't sealed his mouth yet. Maybe his blood still held fire. And fire is dangerous in a room full of ice. So they ignored him, reduced his food, increased the treatments. And when he vanished, they didn't whisper condolences. They just adjusted the charts. You try to remember more. His face, his voice, the things he whispered to himself in the dark. But it's already slipping. The cold is good at that, at making your memories feel less like events and more like dreams. The longer you lie still, the more the details blur. Was his hair dark or gray? Did he say his name? Or did you imagine that? Did he ever actually look at you? Or was that someone else? You feel something heavy stir in your chest. Not grief. That would be too warm, too honest. What you feel is guilt, because you didn't say goodbye, didn't ask his story, didn't even offer a name. And now no one will. His body is probably already cold enough to be considered cured, buried under a white sheet in a white room, until someone else takes the bed and no one speaks of him again. But you remember something else, something small. One night, long after the lights were out, you heard him whisper. Don't let them make you quiet. You weren't sure if it was for you, or for himself, or maybe for someone long dead. But you remember it now. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Because the world will keep erasing him. That is what it does. But you, still half alive, still half warm, you can give him what the war never did. A name, even if invented. A face, even if blurred. A place in your story. You close your eyes. You picture him standing in the snow, wrapped in blankets he hated, whispering into the wind. And tonight, when they come for you with another bowl of ice, you'll whisper back, "He was here," and that will be his elegy. Not a monument, not a song, just a memory that refuses to freeze. It's not the cold on your skin that breaks you. It's the snow between your teeth, the silence it imposes, the way it steals your tongue before it touches your heart. They never call it force feeding, but the body knows when it's being silenced. You're not sure when it started. The first time might have been during a fever spike, when your lips cracked open and someone pressed a cloth soaked in meltwater against them. Not gently, not cruelly, just efficiently. You were too weak to resist, too dry to refuse. And snow, after all, seems innocent. It melts. It purifies. It doesn't scream like fire or sting like salt. But you remember the sensation now, with a kind of horror that doesn't raise its voice. Just a quiet dread. The snow didn't soothe you. It didn't cool the fever. It entered you and stayed. There's something unnatural about it. Not just the cold, though the cold is sharp enough to feel like punishment. It's the taste. It doesn't taste like water. It doesn't taste like winter. It tastes like something that was never meant for mouths. A dusting of metal, a hint of rot, a silence so thick it coats the tongue like ash. You wanted to spit, but spitting was forbidden. So you swallowed. And in doing so, you swallowed compliance. Because this snow is not for hydration. It's not even for medicine. It's for control. The mouth is where rebellion lives. It's where questions form, where screams begin, where names are spoken and remembered. So what better place to invade? You've seen it happen now. Not always with force, sometimes with kindness. A nurse offering a silver spoon, her face carved in porcelain patience. "Just a little," she says, as if it's a favor. But the snow is always too white, too uniform, too pure to be trusted. It doesn't melt right away. It lingers, collecting the space between cheek and teeth, numbing the gums, washing the voice out in slow, deliberate waves. And soon, very soon, speech becomes effort. Your words emerge broken. Your jaw stiffens. Your breath shortens. Until even breathing feels impolite. And that's the goal, isn't it? Not just silence, but a erasure of urgency. Snow in the mouth trains you to hush yourself. To welcome the slow, sacred drowning of language. And once that happens, you're easier to manage. They call it a comfort measure. They call it reducing agitation. They call it bringing down the fire. But you know better now. This is a baptism of ice, a ritual of unmaking. It strips you of heat, of hunger, of history. Because even memory has flavor, doesn't it? The cinnamon of a childhood kitchen. The burnt sugar of a name whispered in the dark. The iron tang of grief. Snow washes that all away, until your mouth is just a vessel, a blank space, an exit wound where identity once lived. You lie back now and feel it gathering again at the corners of your lips. A nurse is approaching with another spoon. You could refuse, but your tongue doesn't quite respond like it used to. It feels too heavy, too foreign, like it belongs to someone you buried days ago. So you open, and you receive, and you pretend, just for a moment, that this is what peace tastes like. But even now, buried beneath the layers of frost and ritual, your mouth remembers. It remembers laughter. It remembers defiance. It remembers you. And though the words are gone, the hunger remains. The hunger not just for food, but for speech, for heat, for the first scream that would shatter this cathedral of snow. You won't scream. Not yet. But one day, maybe your mouth will thaw. And when it does, They'll remember what snow is supposed to fear. You haven't forgotten. Not exactly. It's worse than that. You remember, but only in fragments, polished, distant, unreachable. Like artifacts behind glass. Your thoughts have become exhibits. And you? Just another visitor who doesn't recognize his own handwriting. It begins in whispers. Not voices. Not yet, but sensations you can't place. A smell you should know. A face that flickers and refuses to settle. The feeling of waking up somewhere too familiar to be unfamiliar, but too wrong to be home. You lie in your bed, wrapped in sheets that never wrinkle, beneath light that never warms. And you wonder, where do my thoughts go? Not the little ones. You still know how to ask for water. You still recognize a spoon. You can count to 10, sometimes even 12, if the fever hasn't crept back under your skin. But the bigger ones, the stories, the timelines, the old flame whose letter you never answered, they've been moved. Not erased, not lost, just relocated. You close your eyes and walk through them like a gallery. Room by room, shelf by shelf. There's your grandmother's voice, now behind glass. There's the street you grew up on, cataloged in perfect silence. There's the smell of earth after rain, pinned to the wall like an ancient moth, labeled in Latin and dust. You recognize these things, but they no longer belong to you. They belong to the cold. The Museum of the Frozen Mind has rules. You see, no touching, no rearranging, no grieving out loud. You're not allowed to linger. You're not allowed to remember too hard. If you do, if you press your palms too close to the glass pushes back. A sharp, invisible resistance. As if to say, that part of you is under preservation now. Because the mind, like the body, is being cooled. Not just to heal, but to still. They told you ice was for fever. But they didn't say what happens when a soul starts to shiver. You used to daydream. Now you drift. Used to imagine futures. Now you observe past you're no longer sure you lived. And the worst part? You don't panic. You don't even resist. Because the cold is so gentle, so quiet, so damn reasonable. It tells you that clarity comes with distance. That forgetting is just a form of tidying up. That your mind was cluttered anyway. And wouldn't you rather walk through a museum than a riot? So you nod, and you let the curators do their work. They remove a dream here, dust off a trauma there, polish a face you once kissed, and file it next to the etchings of ancient Rome. And you walk these halls every night. You admire your own memories like they belong to someone else. You begin to forget your own handwriting. And this is the final mercy of the cold. It doesn't burn away what you were. It preserves it. In glass. In silence. In rooms no one visits twice. You are still here. Technically. A figure behind velvet rope. A mind that remembers being alive more than it remembers how it felt. And the exhibit is exquisite. Every memory perfectly frozen. Every emotion perfectly dulled. Every question perfectly unanswered. Because the mind, when frozen, no longer searches. It only stares, politely, forever. They haven't taken everything. Not yet. There's still a flicker somewhere behind your ribs. Something unfinished. Something tender. A thought that burns quiet, but refuses to go out. It doesn't want to be remembered. It wants to be felt. At first, you think it's a mistake. Just a rogue sensation. A slip in temperature. A muscle memory of what it used to feel like to be alive. But then it stays. Right there, behind the sternum. Not pain. Not longing. Just warmth. Subtle. Private. As though a candle were burning in a forgotten room of a locked-down house. And you panic. Not because it hurts, but because you remember it. Not with the sterile detachment you've come to know, not through the fogged glass of your frozen mental archives, but viscerally. It pulses. It radiates. It dares to defy. You try to trace it. Is it a memory? Maybe. But it doesn't have a date. No season, no setting. It doesn't come with names or faces. It doesn't announce itself like an old photograph resurfacing in a drawer. It is simply this: a warm hand in yours, a word whispered too close to the ear, the weight of someone's head resting on your shoulder just before sleep. Is the feeling of being loved. And for the first time in weeks, months, you realize what they were trying to freeze wasn't just the fever in your blood. It was this heat that lives without instruction. This memory that isn't visual but sensory. This human pulse that no hospital bed, no protocol, no bowl of ice has been able to extinguish. They gave you snow for your mouth. They erased the sound of your voice. They curated your memories and packed them behind glass. But they missed something. They missed this. The warmth that doesn't want to be remembered. It wants to be used. You feel it now as rebellion. Not dramatic, not loud, but quietly uncooperative. You blink. You breathe deeper. Not for survival, but for resistance. Because you realize the body, even as it slows, even as it yields to the cold and the discipline and the silence, was never built for permanent winter. Somewhere in your core, your cells are still singing. A low hum, a rhythm, a refusal, and now it moves. From your chest to your spine, to your fingertips, to the hollow of your throat, where your voice might still be hiding. You remember a word, not just any word, the first word, the one that burned when it formed, the one that wasn't polite. And though your mouth is numb, though the nurses are already drawing the curtains and cooling the room again, you speak it, barely a whisper, but enough. And for one brief moment, your breath clouds the air, like smoke, like fire, like you. They'll come, of course. They'll press ice to your lips. They'll say you're overheating. They'll call it a symptom. But you'll know. You'll know that not everything was preserved. Not everything went into the museum. You kept this one thought warm, and that means you are still dangerous. Not because you might run, but because you might remember how. You're not healed. You're not cured, but you're still here. And that, in the empire of frost, is a kind of heresy. This is not a happy ending. It is not even an ending. It is the exhale of something ancient and unfinished. Smoke rising from snow. A ghost refusing to disappear quietly. You thought you'd vanish. That's what they promised in their own way. Not with words, but with gestures. The folded linens, the silent footsteps, the soft clink of metal bowls filled with ice. Everything here has been carefully designed to convince you that endings are clean, neat, white, but endings are never white. They are gray. They are made of smoke. You wake before the bell. The room is quiet, not just with the hush of sleeping patients, but with the deeper silence that only comes when something is shifted. The light is different, cooler, bluer, as if the walls have drawn breath and are waiting for you to exhale. There's a smell in the air, not antiseptic, not snow, ash. You sit up, your body protests, not with pain, but with a stiffness that feels like it belongs to someone else. A borrowed vessel, a skin you've been leasing. You move anyway, because something in your chest is stirring again, and this time it's not the fever. It's the memory of motion. They say smoke is the soul leaving the body. But tonight it's not leaving. It's building. You glance around. The beds are still full. The nurses are still quiet. The candle still flickers by the door. And yet, something is breaking. Not violently, not with a crash, but with a slow, defiant melt. You touch your throat. It's warm. You touch your lips. They are wet, not with ice, but with you. You've thawed, not completely, not safely, but enough to feel. And feeling is dangerous. Feeling leads to remembering. Remembering leads to speaking. And speaking? Speaking leads to smoke. You step out of bed. The floor is cold, but no longer bites. The cold is receding, not from the world, but from you. It can no longer find purchase in your lungs. It no longer owns your breath. You inhale, and the smoke rises. You don't know where you're going. No one does. There is no exit marked on the map, no door left ajar. But you walk anyway, past the other beds, past the watchers, past the shrine of silence built from fear and protocol. And as you move, you realize you are not alone. There are others, eyes flickering open, lips parting, chests rising. The warmth is spreading, not like fire. Fire would be too obvious, too loud. This is smoke. It seeps, it wraps, it refuses to freeze. And maybe that's the ending. Not a triumph, not an escape, but a quiet revolution in the bloodstream. A refusal to die beautifully. A decision to persist, however imperfectly. You won't be remembered as a miracle. You won't be cataloged like the others. You will be spoken of softly, cautiously, at first, as the one who kept breathing. And that is enough. You are not fully awake. You are not fully warm. But you are smoke in a room built for snow. And that, in the end, is how history moves. Not in fire, but in the first curl of warmth that dares to rise. Before anyone notices,